I found out my brother was sleeping with my wife, and that's when I realized everything had been a lie. I still remember that day when I was 10, the day I finally understood what it meant to be invisible in your own home. I rushed through the front door, clutching my math test with the bright red A+ scrawled across the top, my heart pounding with excitement. Mom and Dad were in the living room, Dad with his newspaper, Mom arranging flowers in that crystal vase she treasured more than my achievements. Mom, Dad, look! I waved the paper proudly. Mrs. Thompson said I got the highest score in class. Dad barely lowered his newspaper. Mom glanced up with that distant smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes when directed at me. "That's nice, Lucas," she said flatly, already looking away. Then the front door slammed again. Brandon, my 7-year-old brother, the golden child, came running in with crocodile tears streaming down his chubby face. "Mommy! Daddy!" he wailed. "Jason took my action figure at recess and wouldn't give it back." The transformation was immediate. Dad's newspaper dropped to the floor. Mom rushed to Brandon, kneeling to embrace him. "Oh, sweetie," Mom cooed, wiping his tears. Dad's voice thundered across the room, not at Brandon, but at me. "Lucas, why weren't you watching your brother at school?" My test paper hung limply in my hand. "But Dad, we're in different grades, different playgrounds, no excuses," Mom snapped. "You're the older brother. You should be looking out for him." This was my childhood. A series of moments where Brandon's smallest whimpers eclipsed my greatest achievements. His birthday parties were extravagant affairs, mine were afterthoughts. Christmas mornings meant watching Brandon tear through mountains of presents while I received clothes and school supplies. When I was 13, I spent weeks saving for a model rocket kit. I assembled it meticulously, only to find it shattered on my bedroom floor the next morning, Brandon standing over the pieces. It was an accident, he claimed, though the deliberate footprints on the crushed parts told a different story. When I grabbed his shoulder in anger, he screamed like I'd struck him. Mom and Dad burst in, faces twisted with fury. "How dare you touch your brother?" Dad's palm connected with my cheek before I could explain. "Apologize to Brandon right now," Mom demanded. By 16, I was sick with pneumonia. They took Brandon to Six Flags that weekend anyway. "We promised him," Mom said dismissively, leaving me a bottle of water and some crackers. Hours later, burning with fever, I heard Brandon's laughter as he peeked into my room. "Sucks to be you," he snickered before closing my door. When I turned 18, they didn't even wait for my graduation. Dad placed my worn suitcase by the door one evening after dinner. "You're an adult now," he said flatly. "Time to make your own way." Mom didn't meet my eyes. Brandon smirked from the staircase as I packed my meager belongings. "Don't bother coming back," he whispered as I passed him. That night, I dragged my suitcase down the dark street, watching the lights of the only home I'd known grow dimmer behind me. Each step took me further from what I now understood had never been a family, at least not one that included me. I had no money, no plans, no future. But as the house disappeared from view, a strange thought formed. Maybe being thrown away was my first step toward being found. The first month after being thrown out was hell. I bounced between friends' couches, never staying long enough to become a burden. I learned that lesson when Mike's girlfriend found me asleep on their couch at 2 a.m. "Who the hell is this?" she screamed, jolting me awake. Mike stumbled from the bedroom. "Babe, this is Lucas. I told you he needed a place for a few days." "A few days was last week," she snapped. "Get out, now!" That night, I found myself in the park. Around 3 a.m., a police officer shook me awake. "Can't sleep here, son," he said. "You're disturbing the city aesthetics." Huddled under a highway overpass that night, stomach growling, I looked up at the stars barely visible through the smog. "How much longer can I live like this?" I whispered to no one. I found a job at a warehouse, loading trucks from 4 a.m. to noon. The pay was terrible, but it was steady. I saved every penny, eating at soup kitchens and showering at a truck stop where a sympathetic attendant would look the other way if I slipped him $5. 6 months later, I had enough for the security deposit on a tiny studio apartment with a roommate, Dave. The place was barely 500 square feet, but it had walls, a roof, and a door that locked. For the first time since leaving home, I slept through the night. I was rebuilding, brick by painful brick. I even started taking night classes at the community college. Then COVID hit. The warehouse closed. Dave lost his campus job and moved back home with his parents. I watched my savings drain away with each rent payment. 3 months in, I had a choice: food or shelter. I couldn't afford both. I sold everything: my laptop, the TV, even my bed frame. All I kept was my old pickup truck that I'd bought with years of lawn mowing money. Standing in that empty apartment one last time, I felt that familiar hollowness, abandoned again. With my last $800, I bought a beat-up camper shell and attached it to my truck. Home sweet home, all 60 square feet of it. Living in a camper taught me things they don't teach in school, like how Walmart parking lots are safer than side streets, how to cook on a camping stove, how to wash yourself with bottled water when the gym is closed. One cold night, rain drumming on the camper roof, I sat wrapped in blankets, my phone in hand. I scrolled to my parents' number, thumb hovering over the call button. Maybe they'd let me park in their driveway just until I got back on my feet. I stared at that number for 20 minutes before putting the phone down. "No," I said aloud. "I'll stand on my own." But desperation eventually won out. A week later, I drove to my parents' home. Dad answered the door, his face hardening when he saw me. "Lucas," he said, not stepping aside to let me in. I explained my situation, just asking permission to park my camper in their driveway temporarily. "There's no room," he said, though their circular driveway could fit 5 vehicles easily. "If you want to park here, you'll need to pay market rate." He named a figure that matched what I'd paid for my studio apartment. From inside, I heard laughter. Brandon appeared behind Dad, his arm around a pretty blonde, Ashley, his girlfriend. "Is that the homeless wonder?" Brandon snickered. "Did he come to beg?" "We don't have space for failures," Ashley added, though she'd never even met me. I didn't argue, just turned and walked back to my truck, a promise forming in my mind. Someday, I would have a real home, a place where no one could tell me I didn't belong. It took 2 more years. 2 years of picking up any job I could find. 2 years of showering at the gym and using the library's internet. 2 years of parking in different spots each night to avoid harassment. Then came the break, a steady job at a tech company's warehouse, then a promotion to logistics coordinator when they discovered I had a head for numbers. I saved, I worked overtime. I lived as if I still had nothing, banking every extra dollar. The day I qualified for a mortgage was the day I truly became an adult. The house wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, in need of repairs. But when I put that key in the lock for the first time, pushing open a door that led to space that was mine alone, I took the deepest breath of my life. This wasn't just a house. This was vindication. This was proof that they were wrong about me all along. 2 years in my new home passed peacefully. I'd repainted every room, fixed the leaky roof, and planted a small garden in the backyard. For the first time in my life, I had stability, a sanctuary that was truly mine. Until that Sunday afternoon. The doorbell rang as I was finishing my coffee. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, time seemed to freeze. There they stood, Richard and Mary Carter, my parents, alongside Brandon and a blonde woman I recognized as Ashley from our previous encounter, all wearing plastic smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Lucas!" My mother stepped forward as if to hug me, then seemed to think better of it. "What a lovely home you have!" Before I could process what was happening, they were inside, moving through my house like they owned it. My father ran his hand along the kitchen counter, inspecting for dust. Brandon whistled, exaggeratedly impressed, while Ashley's eyes darted around, calculating. "Nice place," Brandon said, clapping me on the shoulder with forced camaraderie. "Didn't think you had it in you, big brother." There was something predatory in his expression, the same look he'd had as a child right before he'd break one of my toys. I followed them numbly as they toured my home uninvited. Ashley lingered in the spare bedroom I used as an office. "So much extra space for just one person," she remarked, her smile tight. "Must get lonely." After they'd inspected every corner, we gathered in my living room. I remained standing while they made themselves comfortable on my furniture. "Lucas," my father began, clearing his throat. "We've been thinking about your situation." "My situation?" I echoed. "Well, you're here all alone. No wife, no children. All this house just for you," my mother added, gesturing around. "It seems excessive." Brandon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Look, Ashley and I are in a bind. Our apartment is too small now that the twins are growing, and we've got two more on the way. I blinked. Twins? Two more? Ashley nodded, placing a protective hand over her still flat stomach. Four children need space, Lucas. And your house is so much closer to my office, Brandon continued. It would save me an hour of commuting each day. My father nodded along. Your mother and I just don't have the room for them all. Our house isn't set up for small children. So, Brandon's voice turned silky, we thought we'd move in here. You could set up that camper of yours in the backyard. You've lived in it before, right? No big adjustment. Do this for the family, Lucas, my mother urged. Do it for Brandon. The familiar refrain hit me like a slap. All my life I'd heard those words. All my life I'd complied. Looking at their expectant faces, I realized they genuinely believed I would fold again. A quiet laugh escaped me, startling them. No, I said simply. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did you say? My father demanded. I said no. This is my house. I bought it. I fixed it up. I'm not giving it to Brandon. Ashley's face contorted. But we have children, 4 children. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem, I replied evenly. You selfish bastard. Brandon shot to his feet. You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand to see me happy. I looked him directly in the eyes. I've spent my entire life sacrificing for you, Brandon. It was never enough. This time I'm saying no. Silence fell like a hammer. None of them had expected this resistance. Ashley broke first. With a shriek, she lunged at me, her manicured nails aimed at my face. I caught her wrists mid-air, but not before she landed a stinging slap across my cheek. Keeping my grip firm but careful not to hurt her, I reached for my phone with my free hand and switched on the camera. This is all being recorded now, I said calmly. If you continue, I'll call the police immediately. My parents jumped up, suddenly horrified at the escalation. Ashley, stop, my mother cried, pulling her back. My father ushered them toward the door, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Brandon gave me a look of pure hatred as he guided his still fuming wife outside. As Ashley passed me, she hissed, Just wait. You'll regret not helping your family. The door closed behind them with a decisive click. I stood in my entryway, heart pounding, cheek stinging. The sanctuary I'd built felt suddenly vulnerable. I knew in my gut this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of whatever they had planned. The following week, I installed security cameras around my property. Call it paranoia, but the look in Ashley's eyes that day had promised retribution. I wasn't taking chances. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Just as I began to relax, thinking perhaps they'd given up, my nightmare materialized. I was returning home from work one Friday when I spotted a moving truck parked in my driveway. 2 burly men were unloading furniture while Brandon directed them. Ashley stood on my porch pointing where items should go. My brain struggled to process the scene. This couldn't be happening. I slammed my car door hard enough to make them all turn. Brandon's face split into a smug grin. Hey, big brother. Thanks for letting us crash here. We've started moving in. I stood frozen, speechless for several seconds. What the hell do you think you're doing? I finally managed. Brandon shrugged casually. Come on, don't act surprised. You know how it is. Gotta look out for family. As I approached my front door, I noticed the lock had been completely destroyed. The old lock lay on the ground, surrounded by metal shavings. Next to it sat a power drill and toolbox, physical evidence of their break-in. Ashley stepped forward, waving a document. We have a rental agreement right here. You agreed to let us live here, remember? I snatched the paper from her hand. There, at the bottom, was what appeared to be my signature, a crude forgery that wouldn't fool anyone who'd seen my actual handwriting. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Ashley's triumphant expression faltered. What are you doing? Calling the police. Brandon stepped between us. Don't be dramatic, this is just a family matter. Breaking and entering is a family matter? I kept the phone to my ear. Hello? Yes, I'd like to report a break-in at my residence. The intruders are still here. Ashley's face contorted with rage. This is our house now. We have a contract. We'll see what the police have to say about that. The movers, sensing trouble, began backing away toward their truck. Brandon shouted at them to stay, but they weren't interested in getting involved in what was clearly becoming a legal situation. 20 minutes later, two police cruisers pulled up. Officers Thompson and Rivera approached, looking between us with practiced neutrality. "What's going on here?" Officer Thompson asked. I explained the situation calmly while Brandon and Ashley tried to talk over me. I showed the officers the destroyed lock, the drill they'd used, and the forged rental agreement. "That's his signature," Ashley insisted. "He's just having second thoughts." "Sir, is this your signature?" Officer Rivera asked, examining the document. "No, here's my driver's license and credit cards. You can see my actual signature." The officers compared them, exchanging glances. "That's not even close," Officer Thompson muttered. Just then, my parents' car pulled up. They hurried over, faces tight with anxiety. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding," my father began. "Lucas agreed to let Brandon and his family stay here. This is just a family dispute." I turned to the officers. If I agreed, why would they need to forge my signature on a fake contract? The question hung in the air. Officer Rivera looked at my father, waiting for an explanation that didn't come. "Sir," Officer Thompson addressed Brandon, "do you have any proof of permission beyond this document?" Brandon's confident facade cracked. "He's my brother. We don't need paperwork between family." "Actually, you do," Officer Thompson replied. "Without legal authorization, you're trespassing and have committed breaking and entering, which is a felony." "This is ridiculous," Ashley shrieked. She ripped the contract from the officer's hands and tore it to shreds. "You can't prove anything." Officer Rivera raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, destroying evidence is another offense." "Brandon, Ashley, you need to leave immediately," Officer Thompson said firmly. "The homeowner has not given you permission to be here." "Where are we supposed to go?" my mother wailed. "They have 4 children." "They have 2 children," I corrected, "and an apartment they're trying to escape." Brandon, fuming, threw my house keys into the storm drain at the curb. "Sir, retrieve those keys now," Officer Rivera ordered. Glaring, Brandon had to kneel in the street and fish them out with a coat hanger one of the officers provided. As the moving truck pulled away and my family prepared to leave, my mother turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Lucas, do this for Brandon." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had chosen her younger son over me at every turn. "No," I said coldly. "Take responsibility for once." They drove away in defeat, but I knew better than to think this was over. As I watched them disappear down the street, I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. This war had just begun. 2 months passed without incident. I upgraded my security system, changed all my locks, and started to believe the nightmare might be over. My morning routine became sacred again. Coffee by the window, watching the sunrise, savoring the peace I'd fought so hard to earn. Then my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Elaine. "Have you seen this?" The attached photo showed Ashley wrapped around a man who definitely wasn't Brandon. They were at some dimly lit bar, her lipstick smeared across his neck, his hand positioned where it shouldn't be in public. I wasn't surprised. Something about Ashley had always seemed calculated, her affection for Brandon too performative, her ambition too naked. I forwarded the image to a few other relatives who'd witnessed the home invasion drama. Within hours, the family grapevine was humming with speculation. I wondered if Brandon knew. Part of me, the part that remembered him as the little boy who broke my toys, thought he deserved this betrayal. But another part, the brother I might have been in a different life, felt a twinge of sympathy. My phone rang at 1:13 a.m. A week later, Brandon's name flashed on the screen. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. Heavy breathing, then, "You were right." His voice was raw, broken. "About what?" "Everything, Ashley. I found messages on her phone." He laughed bitterly. "Pictures too. Can't unsee that shit." I listened as he explained how he'd confronted her in front of our parents, how she'd cried and denied everything until he showed them the evidence, how our mother had still tried to defend her. "She's been sleeping with him for 2 years, Brandon continued. 2 fucking years. "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to offer. "You win," he choked out. "You were right all along." "This isn't about winning, Brandon. You just chose to believe someone who didn't deserve your trust." "Yeah," his voice cracked. "I've been an idiot my whole life." I couldn't argue with that. The next month unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Brandon demanded a paternity test for their youngest child. The results confirmed his worst fears. The boy wasn't his. The divorce proceedings were brutal. I attended the final hearing, standing in the back of the courtroom as Ashley's carefully constructed life collapsed. Brandon's lawyer had done his homework. Ashley would receive no alimony. She lost custody of all the children, even the one that wasn't biologically Brandon's. He'd been the only father the boy had known, and the judge recognized that bond. When Ashley spotted me watching, her eyes narrowed to slits of pure hatred. I met her gaze steadily. "Now you know what it feels like to lose everything," I said quietly as she passed. She fled the courthouse in tears. Her designer purse, likely paid for with Brandon's money, clutched to her chest like a shield. Brandon spiraled after the divorce. He lost his job, started drinking heavily. Our parents enabled him, of course, letting him move back home, making excuses for his behavior. The golden child had fallen, but they still couldn't see their role in creating the man he'd become. 3 weeks later, Brandon showed up at my door at midnight, drunk and disheveled. His face was scratched, his expensive shirt torn. My first instinct was to close the door. After everything he'd done, all the pain he'd caused, why should I care? But as he collapsed to his knees on my porch, sobbing, something shifted inside me. "I was wrong," he cried. "I've been wrong my entire life." I sighed, then helped him to his feet and brought him inside. This wasn't forgiveness. This was simply one broken person recognizing another. I couldn't resist one final act of justice, though. I shared my story online. Every painful detail of my childhood, the home invasion attempt, Ashley's infidelity. The post went viral overnight. The Carter family name became synonymous with favoritism and failure. Our parents received the social shunning they deserved. Family gatherings happened without them. Old friends suddenly became too busy to meet for dinner. The community they'd worked so hard to impress turned its collective back. Ashley fared even worse. Her lover vanished when responsibility loomed. She became the subject of memes and mockery. Her social media accounts flooded with judgment. I read the comments with grim satisfaction. This was the reckoning I'd waited for my entire life. But as I closed my laptop and looked across the living room at Brandon sleeping on my couch, I realized something unexpected. Vengeance, while sweet, wasn't healing me. It was keeping the wound open. I still had decisions to make about Brandon, about my parents, about the future, but for the first time, those decisions would be mine alone, not dictated by obligation or guilt or fear. My phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "This isn't over. Ashley." I blocked the number without replying. She was wrong. This chapter was ending. Whatever came next would be on my terms, not hers. My security system alerted me at 2:17 a.m. Someone was on my property. I grabbed my phone, swiping to the camera feed just in time to see a hooded figure approaching my driveway. The person moved with deliberate caution, checking over their shoulder repeatedly. But my night vision cameras caught everything. The eggs being removed from a bag, the vindictive way they were hurled at my car, the careful defacing of my license plate with what looked like black paint. I didn't need to see their face. The movements, the build, the vengeful determination, it was Ashley. I watched her complete her childish vandalism before slinking back into the night. I could have called the police, filed another report, but I was tired of being reactive. This time, I had a different plan. The next morning, I downloaded the footage and spent an hour editing it. I added captions, slow motion effects, and even background music. Then I posted it to social media with the title, "When Losers Can't Accept Defeat." I included the backstory, how this woman had tried to steal my house, how she'd been exposed for cheating on her husband, how this was her pathetic attempt at revenge. I made sure to blur her face just enough that I couldn't be sued, but not enough that she wasn't recognizable. The internet did what it does best. By noon, the video had thousands of shares. By dinner, it was being covered by local news outlets as a cautionary tale about revenge vandalism. Comments flooded in. "Imagine being this petty after you were the cheater. Girl needs therapy, not eggs. This is why you don't marry for money, folks." Ashley's remaining social circles evaporated overnight. Former friends publicly distanced themselves. The real estate office where she'd recently started working quietly removed her profile from their website. I watched it all unfold from my home office, sipping coffee, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The flame of revenge burns hot but leaves nothing behind when it's extinguished. Brandon had moved his camper to our parents' backyard, accepting his diminished circumstances with surprising grace. My parents, exhausted by the drama they'd helped create, retreated into a quieter life, no longer having the energy to manipulate or scheme. Ashley disappeared completely after the video went viral. Someone said she'd moved to Arizona to start over. I didn't care enough to confirm. For the first time since I could remember, I had peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but genuine tranquility, the kind that comes from knowing you faced your worst fears and survived. 6 months after the egg incident, I invited friends over for a housewarming party, the one I should have had years ago. We grilled in the backyard, drank cold beer, and laughed under string lights as the summer evening cooled around us. As we gathered for a toast, I looked around at these people who had chosen to be in my life, who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. "This is the first time in my life I've had a place that's truly mine," I said, raising my glass. "And this time, no one can take it from me." Glasses clinked. Conversation resumed. Music played. My house was filled with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Outside, beyond my fence, the world continued its chaotic spin. But here, in this space I'd fought for, justice had finally been served. The nightmare was over. I was home.